I want to dedicate today's class with profound appreciation and respect and gratitude to my dear wife in honor of her birthday on Shushan Purim Katan. She was born on Shushan Purim Katan. Esther Avigail Bas Rachel Sarah, the wind beneath my wings. And I want to use the opportunity to express my gratitude and my profoundest blessings to her and all of her loved ones, La'arichis Yamim V'Shanim Tovos, with much health, happiness, prosperity, nachas, from all of her, our children, herself, and even from her husband. So thank you, and thank you, Esti, for everything. So today is Purim Katan, which is of course called the humble Purim, or the miniature Purim, or the small Purim. And the Mishnah says in Maseches Megillah, the first chapter, that there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar. In other words, for all practical purpose, they're identical. The only difference is that in the first Adar, we don't read the Megillah, and we don't give matanas l'avyanim, which means the rituals, the mitzvahs that we do on Purim, we don't do in the Purim Katan. We don't read the Megillah, we don't do matanas l'avyanim. The Mishnah does not mention a Suda, that we don't do a feast on the Purim Katan or Shalach Manas. It just mentions that we don't do Matanas L'Avyanim or the Megillah. So this created a very interesting debate, of course, among the halachic authorities. Should we have a feast? Should we have a Su'uda on Purim Katan? And there are two views in halacha. This is the last siman of Shulchan Aruch Ohr Chaim, section 697, Tafresh Tzadik Zayin. One view is that one ought to have a special Su'uda and Mishta on Purim Katan, just like we have on Purim Gadol. And another view is no, it's included in the fact that we don't do the Megillah, we don't do Matanas L'Avyanim, we don't do the Suda. The Ramah finishes off and he says that the minig is people don't make a feast on Purim Katan, but he says, but still, it's good to add in your Su'uda a little bit in order to fulfill the opinion of those who say you should have a feast, a special feast on Purim Katan, and add in Simcha. And he finishes with the words that conclude the whole Shulchan Aruch, a pasuk from Mishlei Tesvav, Proverbs 15:15, Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, which means a good heart is always feasting. A good heart is always ready for a party, is always ready for a mishta. So he says, so you don't have to be so particular. Purim Katan, it's not real Purim. He says, a good heart is always, if you could find a good excuse. That's very interesting. The whole Shulchan Aruch ends on this note. You wouldn't think that would be the conclusion of the entire Shulchan Aruch, which is seen as a book of laws and structure. It's all about structure and laws, but he finishes off on that note. Toiv Lev, a good heart, Mishta Tamid, is always in a state of feasting, of joy, of openness, of celebration, which is a pasuk from Mishlei. Shlomo Melech says that there are two mindsets, Kol Yemei Ani Rayim v'Toiv Lev Mishta Tamid. The days of somebody who lives in a mindset of poverty, the days are negative, but Toiv Lev, somebody who has a good disposition, somebody who has a good heart, Mishta Tamid, they're always in a state of feasting, even on a regular day, certainly on a day like Purim Katan. It's interesting that the Ksav Sofer, who was the famous rabbi of Bratislava, of Preshburg, the son of the Chassam Sofer, he writes something very interesting. He says that since the Mishnah says that there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar, only reading the Megillah and Matanas L'Avyanim, so it sounds like a Suda we should do on Purim Katan. As I said, it's one of the views in Halacha. But he says that means the Mishnah also doesn't say Shalach Manas, that the difference is giving Shalach Manas. He says that means according to that view, Purim Katan, you should be giving Shalach Manas as well. Very interesting view, and he explains why. He says because Shalach Manas initially was instituted, according to many opinions, as part of the Suda of Purim. When people celebrate with each other, you go out to a restaurant with a bunch of friends, so you exchange courses. You take a little bit from mine, I take a little bit from yours. That looks much better than what I have. So he says on Purim, when people were celebrating and feasting together, that's where Shalach Manas, that's why Mishloach Manas became part of the mitzvah, because you exchange gifts, especially you know that somebody may not have food for the meal of Purim. So therefore, Shalach Manas was to really give them food so they'd be able to have Sudas Purim. So the Ksav Sofer says, according to this, Vasir Apanim Hatas, how does it make sense that on Purim Katan, you're doing a meal in honor of Purim, but it's a meal only for myself and not for somebody else? So he says, those who do the meal, Purim Katan, should also give Shalach Manas. Send food to somebody else, they should also be able to have a meal. It's a little bit different than the Shalach Manas that we're used to today. Shalach Manas was actually like real food, not the more candies. Today, often Shalach Manas is the less edible, the better it is. The less healthy, the better it is. But really, Shalach Manas Mishloach manas ish l're'eh, according to this, was not just a symbol of friendship, of sending something, which is also part of it, but also actually giving food so that the meal of Purim is celebrated by everybody with the same celebration and with the same abundance and the same harchava. Certainly, any way anybody looks at Purim Katan, it's 30 days before Purim Gadol. So today, I want to focus on one aspect of Purim, since we are on Purim Katan, and the preparations to Purim Gadol also begin, and Tov Leiv Mishta Tamid. I want to focus on one aspect of the story of Purim, the story of the Megillah, on this day, both because of this day and in preparation for the grand Purim, for the Purim Gadol coming. I want to just begin with a story as an introduction. It's a story about the famous Rabbi of Lodz. Lodz was one of the great communities in Poland. You've heard of the community in Lodz and the Lodzer Shul, and probably, unfortunately, the Lodzer ghetto of Lodz as well. And the Rav of Lodz for close to 40 years, I think 35 years, was a Jew named Rabbi Chaim Michel. He was a legendary leader, both in terms of his scholarship and equally in terms of his dedication. And he passed away Tafresh Ayin Beis, 1912, Pesach Sheni. Yudalad year Pesach Sheni, 1912. And they tell a story that it was once a very cold winter in Lodz. And those are the days, these are the early 1900s or the late 1800s. And people relied on fires that they made in their homes, the fireplaces, in order to warm their bones and their wives' bones and their children's bones on a cold winter night or a cold winter day. And it was one particular winter, we know that there are different types of winters, that the coldness was simply unbearable. And poor Jews who didn't have enough money to buy lumber, to buy wood, were literally sitting and they were freezing. They were freezing, the husbands, the wives, and the children. And Rabbi Chaim Michel made it his personal priority to raise money to be able to give everybody money to be able to buy wood, to be able to build fires in their homes every night. So the story is that he once went to a very wealthy Jew who was known to have a lot of money, but he was not known to be as generous, as benevolent, at least not proportionate to the amount of money that he had, that he owned. And he went to see him, asking him to really assist in this urgent matter of hatzalas nefashos, of literally saving people, not just from discomfort, but what could be illness and, God forbid, much worse. So he comes to the home of this wealthy person who didn't usually allow people into his home. And he knocked on the door, and the servant or the assistant, the person running the home, came out. And he said, please tell the host, please tell the Balabayas, the master of the home, that the Lodzer Rav, the Rav of Lodz, Rabbi Chaim Michel, came to see him. So, of course, when he gave him that message, the man came outside. It happened to be at night, and it happened to be one of the coldest nights of the winter. You know, in New York, you sometimes have the degrees, it's 2 degrees, but together with the winds, it's, 9 below zero, 10 below zero, those nights. Just walking to your neighbor's home can be quite an intense experience. It was one of those nights in Poland. And Rabbi Chaim Michel is outside, and the man comes out, and he says, Rebbe, to what do I owe this honor? Please come in. He says, no, I just want to speak to you for a few moments. Now, he came out undressed because he just came to greet him by the door. But in honor of the Rav, he comes out, and he says, you probably know about this winter, and you probably know about the fate of many poor Jews in Lodz and what their situation is. And I'm really creating an emergency fund because we need to save people's lives, and this is priority number 1 that trumps any other priority. And Rav Michel, the Rav, is talking about it and elaborating on the crisis, and the poor man is trembling from cold. And he says, Rebbe, can we please come in? I have a comfortable home. I have a wonderful fireplace. We could sit in the salon, in the family room, in the dining room. He had a big house. He had a mansion. Come in. He says, no. I don't want to go into your house. I don't feel worthy. He says, Rebbe, it'll be an honor for me. He says, no, let's stay here. And he plays dumb, and he's making himself oblivious, and he goes on. And And he says, God has blessed you, and the reason he's blessed you is this money is a pekadon, it's a deposit you should have for yourself, but the amount, a percentage of it, 10%, 20%, you give away to the poor people. And he's elaborating on the situation, and he's telling him stories of women, and women who just gave birth, and young children, and older children, and young adults, and older people, senior citizens who are suffering. A second time, the man says, Rebbe, can we please continue the conversation inside the house? It's freezing. And he says, no, please, I just want to stay outside. I'm soon going to finish. And finally, when he concludes, he comes with the sachakel, with the punchline, and he says, this is the amount of money I need for you, which was an extravagant amount that he wanted from him. So the Gevir thought, and he said, okay, I'll give it to you. So he said, now I'll come into the house, and we could continue talking. So he says to him, why didn't you want me to go? Why didn't you want to go in the house in the beginning? You could have said everything. He said, I could have said everything, but you would have not experienced anything I spoke about. I needed you to viscerally experience what I'm talking about, not as an abstract concept, but I need you to feel, at least for 10 minutes, I needed you to feel what it is to tremble in such cold night after night after night, and without knowing that the door is right here and just a few feet away you're in a warm home. I needed you to taste from the experience. Now that you tasted, now you understand, now that you empathize, you don't only understand, now I'm happy to come into your house and we could schmooze for as long as you want. I say this as an introduction to one of the major themes we're going to be addressing today. We all know the story of Purim, but the story of Purim is so multi-layered and so multifaceted that it's really an endless story. Like every story in Torah, there's layers upon layers, and there's nuances and details that sometimes you don't realize until you study it again and again. It's like Chumash. You could read the same story. How many times can you read the story of Yosef and his brothers? Every year you could read it again and see a new dimension to the story. And sometimes, the way it is with always in Torah, that a small detail captures a fundamental theme. It's like we spoke once about the fact that it says in Chumash, Zois HaTorah Adam ki Yom Hazbal in Parshas Chukas. Chazal say Torah is compared to an organism, to an Adam, to a person. Today we know that in each of the cells, there are around 60 or 70 trillion cells, and in each of the cells, there's a double copy of what they call the genome. This is just a discovery of the 1950s. And the genome contains within it the blueprint, the manual of the entire organism. It contains within it what we call today the DNA molecules that contain a blueprint of how the entire body is constructed. So one would think that this type of material, this type of genetic code, you can only find in the brain, but the truth is, even in saliva, even in a nail, even in a strand of hair, every detail, every nuance, every crevice, every prat, even the tiniest part of the body, you could say it's the hair on the pinky or the toe. You have something in the leg or in the toe which is not so significant, not so essential. That also contains the blueprint of the entire body. And the same is true with Zois HaTorah Adam, that sometimes in a small detail you have a picture of the entire collective reality. When Mordechai finds out that Haman succeeded in convincing the Persian monarch Achashverosh to execute his plan of genocide against the entire Jewish people, to literally exterminate Chalila, every Jew, minar, as the Megillah says, laroig, lahashmid, laroig, ulabedis kol haYehudim, minar v'adzak and taven nashim b'yom echad, b'yom shlosh asar l'chodesh asar shtei masar chodesh Adar, to exterminate every Jew, kol haYehudim, as kol haYehudim, from young to old, children, women, men, no difference, all in one day. So we know Mordechai immediately puts on a sack. He comes close to the portal of the king. He can't go in, dressed this way, even though he was a prominent guest in the palace. And he sends a message to the first lady, to Queen Esther, and asks of her, pleads with her, to go speak to her husband, to the king Achashverosh, to annul the decree. Esther is very hesitant. She sends back a message and she says that there is a rule. And the rule is that if somebody comes in to the king uninvited, without an invitation, achas dasei lahamis, you go out with a head shorter. I was not invited to go to my husband, to the king, for 30 days. You're not dealing with a normal person. You're dealing with a dictatorship. You're dealing with a tyrant. You're dealing with a monarch who's an absolute dictator, even his own queen. He killed his first queen. He could kill his second queen. So Mordechai tells Esther, in his famous words, he tells her, don't think that you're going to be saved in the palace. The Jewish people will be saved regardless, but you and your father's home may perish. And who knows if this is not the reason you became a queen. And when Esther hears those words, she tells Mordechai, she consents and she tells Mordechai the following message. And that's your first source. It's in Megillah chapter 4, Esther Perek Dalet, Pasuk Tesvav, Tezai, and Yud Zayin. And the message is, she says, Vatomer Esther lahashav al Mordechai. Esther sends back her answer to Mordechai. And what's her answer? Leich knois es kol Yehudim anemtzayim b'Shushan v'tzumu alai v'al toichlu v'al tishtu shloishes yamim laila v'yem gam ani v'na'arosei atzum chen. You have it also in English translation. Go assemble all of the Jews who live, who are present in Shushan. Shushan was, of course, this capital. And let them fast on my behalf. Don't eat, don't drink for 3 days, night and day. In fact, me and my Nairosai, my assistants, my servants in the palace, will observe the same fast. And then she says, then I shall go into the king, though it's contrary to the law. I'm not allowed to go in. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. This is the message Esther sends back. Mordechai didn't speak about gathering the Jews. Mordechai told Esther, go into your husband and plead with him. Tell him what happened. Tell him to nullify the decree. Esther said, I can't. I'm going to die. I'll be killed. So Mordechai responded and said, this is why you became a queen. This is your moment. This is your mission. So Esther now responds and says, okay, you go gather all the Jews in Shushan. Initiate a fast for 3 days and 3 nights. I will also fast together with my maidservants, and then I'll go into the king. If I'm made to perish, I'll perish. And the pasuk continues, Vayaver Mordechai. So Mordechai passed over. Vayas, and he did Kechol Asher Tzivso of Esther. He did everything that Esther has commanded him, has instructed him to do. And that's how the chapter ends, and then the Megillah goes on with the story of Esther going into the king on the 3rd day of her fast. She dresses up in royalty, she goes into the king, she invites him to one party, invites him to another party, and ultimately salvation happens. Now you right away see here, just parenthetically, it's interesting, I think the Maharal of Prague writes, the Maharal has a commentary called Or Chadash, the New Light, it's a commentary on the Megillah, and he says that when one fasts for 3 days, day and night, it comes out to 72 hours, right? 24, 48, 58, 68, right? 72 hours. So he says that's the gematria of ubechein. Ubechein is nun and chaf. So you have 50, 60, 70. 50, 60, 70.
Just the base.
Bechein, right, very good, thank you. Bechein. So he says, Bechein, and with this Bechein, with these 72 hours, Avay el HaMelech. That's how he explains the Bechein. I want to focus on one detail which you may say is not significant at first glance, but as we'll see, it's extremely significant. It says, Vayaver Mordechai. Mordechai passed over. What does it mean he passed over? What did he pass over? He passed over and he did everything that Esther told him to do. Could have just said, Vayas Mordechai kol asher tzivsa of Esther. Mordechai did whatever Esther said. He gathered the Jews. He initiated a fast day, and that's what he did. But the Megillah says Vayaver. Vayaver means he was over, he passed over. This is a question that the Gemara asks. It's a very strange expression. What does it mean he passed over? What did he pass over? It could have said he went and he did. That would have also been superfluous. It could have said he did. So if you take a look in your next source sheet, Megillah Daf Tesvav. This is Talmud, the Gemara Megillah, page 15. And there's a debate. Amar Rav. There's a dispute. What does it mean Mordechai passed over? Amar Rav. Rav, one of the greatest Talmudic sages, says it means Shehevi Yom Rishon Shel Pesach B'Tainas. he passed over the first day of Pesach with a fast day. Rashi says in the Megillah, Vayaver comes from the word Aveira. Mordechai did, so to speak, an Aveira. There was a sin. Why? He transgressed the obligation to rejoice on Pesach by instituting a fast day, which was, of course, Esther's instruction. And as Rashi explains, the decree came out on the 13th day of Nisan. That's what the Megillah says, Yud Gimel Nisan. So when Esther told Mordechai, establish a fast day for 3 days, it was Yudalad Nisan, Tesvav Nisan, Tezayin Nisan. Erev Pesach, the first day of Pesach, and what we call here the second day of Pesach. Or in Eretz Yisrael, the first day of Chol HaMoed. So that means, Yom Tif, they're fasting instead of eating. So Vayaver Mordechai was over. He transgressed. He violated, so to speak, the mitzvah of Pesach, the mitzvah of Yom Tif, by creating this fast day that continued Yudalat Tesvav Tezayin. There's a Medrash that says that the fast day started Yud Gimel. They fasted the same day. Still, it would be Yud Gimel, Yudalat Tesvav. Rashi says in the Megillah was Yud Gimel, Yudalat Tesvav Tezayin. And on the third day, of course, Esther went in to invite her husband to a party. So the third day was Yud Gimel, Yudalat Tesvav. She went in. There was a party. She invited him at the party for a second party. That would have been Tezayin. It was a party of wine. So Esther, of course, got to drink the 4 cups of wine with her husband. He didn't know. He didn't know that she's drinking 4 cups of wine. But she made sure there was a lot of wine. He got tipsy. Haman got tipsy. And she did what she had to do at her Seder. She drank her 4 cups of wine. Then she invites him. She invites him to a second party, Tezayin. Of course, at the second party, she spills the beans. And she tells Achashverosh who she is and who Haman is. Haman falls on the bed. Achashverosh gets angry. Charvaina suggests that he hangs Haman, and that happened Tezayin Nisan at night, Rashi says. Tezayin Nisan in the evening, the second day of Pesach. In the evening, it's even brought in halacha that the second day of Pesach, we should add something to our meal, our lunch meal, to Zeicha, to the party that Esther made for Achashverosh on that second day of Pesach when the whole Yeshua began. The night before, of course, Mordechai, the king couldn't sleep, also the night of Pesach, but however, you organize the fast days, Yud Gimel, Yudalat Tesvav, Tezayin, Vayaver Mordechai, he was over on the mitzvah of Pesach. Chazal say that Mordechai said, if there's no Jews, you don't need Pesach. If there's not going to be a Klal Yisrael, nobody's going to eat matzah, nobody's going to drink wine, you don't need a Pesach. So that comes first. Whatever his consideration was, the Megillah makes sure to say, Vayaver. That's Rav. The second opinion is Shmuel. Shmuel Amar, the Avar Arkum Demaya. Mordechai crossed over a stream of water in order to bring the message to all. He goes out from Shushan. He goes out from he was talking to Esther. He was communicating with Esther through a messenger, through Asach. And now he needs to implement what Esther said. So he has to gather all the Jews. So it doesn't just say he did what Esther said. He passed over. What did he pass over? Apparently he had to go over a canal or a river or a pond, or Kruma Demai is a stream of water. He had to go over that in order to implement what Esther said. Now this interpretation is very difficult. And why don't you say he had to cross a street and he had to go over a park and maybe there was a forest? Let's say some Mefarshim say that apparently in Shushan there was a river or a stream, and it could be that many of the Jewish residents lived on the other side. So Mordechai had to cross the river or cross the stream in order to invite them. Okay, granted. But the Megillah makes a point of saying it, which is very strange, because why is that relevant to the story? What if he would have to cross a street? And what would he have to cross a few streets? And what would he have to cross a park? And what would he have to cross something else? Some landmark? It doesn't seem to be relevant to the story. You could have said, Mordechai did what Esther said. But it's somehow the Megillah wants to tell you that he had to cross over a canal of water, Kruma Demaya. That's Vayaver Mordechai. Some say that in Shushan itself there was a division, and the palace was in one part of Shushan. And Mordechai had a right to live there because he was close to the king. But most Jews lived on the other side. So to gather the Jews, he had to go to the other side. Granted, but the Megillah makes sure to emphasize this. Kruma Demaya. Now, in order to appreciate this, let's go to Esther's words. If we go to Esther's words, Esther tells Mordechai, Leich knois es kol haYehudim hanimtzayim b'Shushan. go and gather all of the Jews who are present in Shushan. And here the question is, what does Esther mean with the word Kol HaYehudim? She could have said it much more succinctly, Lech Knoises HaYehudim Anamtzayim B'Shushan. Go gather the Jews who are in Shushan. Mordechai was the Maneg Adar. He was the leader of the generation. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. Mordechai was considered the spiritual leader of the Jewish people. So if Esther says, go gather the Jews, obviously Mordechai would go gather all the Jews. Why would he exclude some Jews? But Esther says, go gather all the Jews who are in Shushan. Why wouldn't Mordechai? He would go gather the Jews. He would start pointing fingers and say, you, yes, this one not. Why would we think to exclude anybody that Esther has to emphasize Kol HaYehudim? Now you might say, Esther wanted to tell him, I want everybody to be gathered. But practically speaking, we understand that you can't always gather every single member of a nation. You have somebody who may be old, you have somebody who may be frail, you have somebody who may be sick, you have little babies, you have a mother who just gave birth. Not everybody could come to every gathering. And you can't force them. And even though Mordechai is the head of the Sanhedrin, they're in exile, they're in a foreign country, whoever could come is going to come. So obviously there's going to be people who are not going to come. So what does Esther mean when she says, Lech Knois es Kol HaYehudim? Now you might say, that's how you speak. Maybe that's how you speak. But the truth is, it's not so simple. There's a tractate to Mishnayos called Erkin, Meseches Erkin. It has to do with how we evaluate. When a person says, I want to donate to the Bais HaMikdash, the value of a particular person, there's different numbers, different ages, different Erkin. It's a whole tractate in Mishnayos based on the Psukim and Parshas B'chukoisei and in Gemara. The Mishnah there begins with the word Hakoil. Everybody. Everybody can evaluate, everybody can be evaluated. And the Gemara unusually spends 3 dafim, 3 pages, daf Beis, daf Gimel, I think daf Dalet, to go through the whole Mishnayos, wherever it says the word Hakoil, and say, why does it say everybody? You could have just said the obligation, and if you don't exclude anybody, we know that it's everybody. If a teacher is saying, tomorrow the class is going on a trip, that means the whole class. If you want to say certain people are not going on the trip, specify. So you might say, maybe Esther didn't have to say it, but perhaps in wording, sometimes you articulate yourself verbally in a more elaborate way to specify what you're saying. Perhaps, but the fact is that it's transcribed in Torah. If it's transcribed in Torah, every word is precise and every word is considered divine. Especially considering that Mordechai and Esther had other conversations. They're not recorded in the Megillah because they're not relevant. Here this word is recorded. And in the Megillah it's even more emphasized because you have to hear every word. So if somebody is hearing the Megillah, they have to hear the word koil. And if they don't hear the word koil, they're missing the Megillah. They're missing something essential in the Megillah. Every word is relevant. So the Gemara, for example, gives an example. In the Daf Yomi, many of your husbands or children began learning Maseches Chagiga this week, or actually last week, Friday, Shabbos, Friday. The opening of Maseches Chagiga is Hakel Chayavin B'Re'iyah. Everybody, all Jews are obligated to come see the Shechina in the Beis HaMikdash 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. Now the Mishnah goes through those who are not obligated. Women who sometimes have to stay home, they have little children, are not obligated to come Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos and schlep tiny kids to the Beis HaMikdash. I mean, they could come if they want, but they're not obligated. Somebody who can't walk, who's lame, Mishnah says is not obligated. A child who can't walk is not obligated even in chinuch. But Shamai says if he can't ride on his father's shoulders, he's too small, he's not obligated. But Hillel says no, even if he could ride, but he can't walk himself holding his father's hand, he's not obligated even for chinuch. Somebody who can't see is not obligated. So the Gemara asked the first question, why do you start off Hakel? Why do you say Hakel, everybody? Lasuya Mai. Who do you want to include? You want to include somebody. If not, you could have just said, Jews are Chayav in Re'iyah, excluding these. You could even start off, these and these individuals are excluded from the mitzvah. We understand, everybody else is included. So if Esther is not excluding anybody, everybody is included, and the Gemara goes through dozens, it's interesting, dozens of examples. In the whole Mishnayos, wherever it says the word Hakoil, what are you trying to teach me? Something is fishy. And here the Gemara Taka says they're teaching that even somebody who only has eyesight with one eye, according to this Mishnah, may be obligated. That's the Hakal. Or another opinion is it's a slave. So usually slaves are not chayiv to come to the Beis HaMikdash. But he's chetzi eved v'chetzi ben chayrin. He was bought by two partners and one of them emancipated him. So 50% of him is free. 50% of him is still enslaved. Is he chayiv? So that's why it says, Hakol! Even that half a slave you would think he's excluded, he's also included. The Gemara says the Hakol chayav in Megillah Brais, everyone is chayiv in Megillah. The Gemara says, what's Hakol? The Gemara says you would think women usually are not chayiv in mitzvahs Esther Shazman Grama. Mitzvahs that are connected to time. Megillah is connected to time on Purim. The Chiddush is they are obligated in Megillah. So when it says Hakol, even in Mishnayos, or in Brais or in Gemara, which is Torah Shabal Peh, it's precise. Everybody is always including a certain category that you would have excluded. Certainly in Torah Shabiksav, where every word is even more precise and meticulous. When Esther says Leich Knois, not Es HaYehudim, Es Kol HaYehudim. There's somebody or some group she's referring to that Mordechai would have excluded. So if she said, go gather Jews, and you would think, okay, that's everybody. Why should Mordechai exclude anybody? If she wants to exclude, she should say, besides. She didn't say besides, it means everybody. That wouldn't have been enough. Mordechai would have excluded somebody. And Esther understood that. So there was a subtle contrast here, a subtle debate going on. And if you want to see how meticulous this is, take a look how the Pasuk speaks about what Mordechai did. Vayas Mordechai, Vayas kechoil asher tzivsa alav Esther. Here again we have a superfluous word. It should have said Mordechai did what Esther told him. Now, if Esther would have told him to do 49 things, right? So when a woman tells her husband, a wife tells her husband, I need you to do 49 things, she makes him repeat. And there's a good reason for it. Because we have discussed it in the past, male brains are like waffles, female brains are like spaghetti. In waffles, every waffle is self-contained, and you do not allow the maple syrup to go from one waffle to another waffle. Everyone has its square, and there's a big mechitza in between, and they shall not meet. With spaghetti, every strand is interconnected and integrated with many, many more. So I understand if Esther would have given him a to-do list of even 15 things, and you say, Mordechai got it all right. You ever see guys shopping in Evergreen with the list, and then they call, right? I know for myself. They call and they send pictures. Did I get it right? One item, okay, 2 items. And the truth, tell me, if he comes home with 40 items and they're all right, you can make a shechianu. There's usually something off. So, Vayas Mordechai kechoil asher tzivsa alav Esther. What did Esther tell him to do? Esther told him to do one thing. Gather all the Jews and they should fast. So it could have said, Vayas Mordechai, asher tzivsa alav Esther. Vayas, he did what Esther told him. You want to say he did everything that Esther said? Say, Vayas koil. Vayas kechoil asher tzivsa alav Esther. This word kechoil is brought in the Megillah another 2 times. Over there I understand. It says that Haman had the scribes write in the decree everything that he suggested to Achashverosh. In other words, not a single Jew is being saved. And when Mordechai had Achashverosh reverse the decree, the scribes wrote everything that Mordechai and Esther said. Every detail how the Jews can defend themselves. That's very clear. Here, the Torah says, Vayas Mordechai kechoil, like everything that Esther said. But the truth is, we understand why. Because Esther said, Leich knois es kol ha-Yehudim. So what did Mordechai do? He got that point. He listened to the koil of Esther, and that's what he did. The question now is, what group of Jews would have been excluded? And why did Esther then have to say, Leich knois es kol ha-Yehudim? And the answer is, and the answer to this, or one of the explanations to this, was shared by the Lubavitcher Rebbe of Fabrengen after Purim, Shabbos, Parshas Ki Sisa, Tez Zayin Adar Tovshin Lamed Aleph, 1971. There was a group that Mordechai would have excluded. So when the Gemara says Hakoil, it says Hakoil, Lasuya Mai. Who do you want to include? Esther was including a certain category. Who would Mordechai exclude? And the answer to that is Esther told him, go gather the Jews of Shushan. Now, the Jews of Shushan had a complicated history, because we know, you could look in your next source, Megillah Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, Tractate Megillah, page 12. Shalu Talmidav Reb Shimon ben Yochai. The students asked Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Mipnei man ischayvu seinein sheyisol shabayis Adar I. Why did the Jews of that generation, why was there a decree of extermination against them? Amar lahem, Reb Shimon ben Yochai, as a good teacher, said, Imru atem, why don't you answer the question? Amru loy, they said, B'pnei shenenu misudasa shaloi seirash. Because the Jews enjoyed the feast of that wicked person. Let's remember Achashverosh, on the third year of his reign, threw a party for 180 days. That's a half a year. 180 days. Asa HaMelech Mishta, he made a party. L'chol sara v'avoda, of all of his ministers and all of his servants. For 180 days the man was drunk. The beginning of the Megillah, when the 180 days were up, he still didn't have enough. You could think, Muhulat, the guy was partying for 180 days, that's a half a year. A year is 365 days, this is mamish almost a half a year. It wasn't enough. Asa Melech, the Melech made a feast, L'chol ha'am, hanimtzayim b'shushan, l'migodel v'atkatan mishter shivas yom b'chatzar ginas b'asar Melech. For the entire nation, not just the people who worked for the palace, all of his subjects in the capital, he made a feast for 7 days in the courtyard, in the garden, in the house of the king. And the and the Megillah goes on to describe the details of the feast, what was served, how it was served, the types of materials and fabrics with which he decorated the feast. And that's when the story with Vashti happened. He wanted her to appear, and ultimately, she was removed as a result. Says the Gemara that the students of Reb Shimon ben Yochai said, Nenu misudasa shaloi seirash. The Jews enjoyed the feast of that rush. The Mefarshim say, so that's an Isser of treif. Eating treif is not deserving of extermination. So there's many different interpretations. Those who say the Rosh Yosef says they ate fat and blood, which is a penalty of kares. Others say because Achashverosh made this party to celebrate the destruction of the Bais HaMikdash, he made a calculation that the 70 years since the destruction have passed, and the Jews are not going back, and they're not rebuilding the new Bais HaMikdash. And he even used the vessels of the Bais HaMikdash, and he displayed them at the party. So Jews enjoying such a party is a completely different case. Others say because Mordechai and the Sanhedrin told them not to go, so they violated the commandment of the Sanhedrin. Others say the word is nenu misudasai. Finally, their enjoyment came from the fact that Achashverosh invited them to the Shushan White House, and he took a selfie with them, and their picture was published on the front page of the Shushan Times, and from this came their dignity. Finally, we made it. We're not anymore the distinct, weird, archaic, tribal nation of Jews. We're finally integrated, we're assimilated. The king has us rub shoulders with him in the White House of Shushan. Nenu. It's not that they ate, they enjoyed it. Not just they came. The king invites you, you come. This became their identity, their raison d'etre. There's different explanations in the commentaries. So the students asked him, if so, the decree should have been only on the Jews of Shushan, not on any other Jew. That's what Reb Shimon ben Yochai asked them. So they said there was something else, and that the other Jews in the other countries were engaged in idolatry in the time of Nebuchadnezzar some decades earlier. If this is the case, we could now understand what Esther meant when she said, Leich Knoises Kol HaYehudim. Mordechai thought to himself, Esther is telling me to gather all the Jews. And gather them for what? Gather the Jews. And gather them for what? The first thing is Jews should be united. Leich Knois. That's what Maharal explains. Leich Knois, Jews have to be united. When there's a challenge, when Jews are united, everything is different. That's number one. It's like a fortress. When Jews are united, you create a fortress and nothing can get through. If Jews are disassociated, if there's a lack of cohesion, if there's a lack of unity, so it's like a city has a fortress and there's breaches everywhere because we're not together. Leich Knois, bring the Jews together. Besides that, Leich Knois means bring them together like Beis Knesses, to daven, to pray, to learn, to daven. And then she says, and fast, which is a concept of tshuva, returning, introspection, reinvention, transforming yourself. So this is Esther's task. So Mordechai is thinking to himself, who should I go invite? I should go invite everybody. I'm going to go invite those Jews who for 7 days were rubbing shoulders and eating treifas and drinking yayin nesach and enjoying the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, b'sudasi shaloi serasha. Especially Esther wants that they should fast for 3 days and 3 nights. People who didn't stop partying for 7 days with every conceivable drink and food in the world, as the Megillah describes in such detail. Kalim, Mikalim, Shoinim, V'yein, Malchus, Rav, Ki Yad HaMelech, Vashsiyah, Chados. There was endless drinking, Kirtzayin, Ish, V'yish. Everybody could do whatever they want. The party was literally endless and infinite, according to the Asagas of Achashverosh. And now you're going to have these Jews fast for 3 days and 3 nights. At best, you can influence these Jews that they should start eating kosher. Before they eat, they should make a bracha. After they eat, they should bench. They should acknowledge that God gave them the food. But to go from one extreme of a party of 7 days without a sign of Yiddishkeit, Nenu misudasa shaloisei rasha, to the other extreme of fasting for 3 days and 3 nights, it's not practical. It's not conceivable. It's too much of a radical transformation, Mordechai may be thinking. How can I go to those Jews? Furthermore, we have a principle, ein kateger, nasa saneger. We know that the prosecutor doesn't suddenly become the defender. In a courtroom, you don't ask the prosecutor to start cross-examining one of the witnesses to help the defender. That's not what the kateger is paid for. It's not what he's interested in. We know that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur didn't go in with garments of gold into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Why? So Chazal say, because the gold is what the Jews used for the Egel Azav, for the golden calf, in Parshas Ki Sisa, this week's Parsha. And ein kateger nasa saneger. You don't take the gold, so the Kohen Gadol went in with simple clothes made out of linen on Yom Kippur. The rest of the year he had gold. Mordechai here is also taking the Jews inside, into Avodas Pnim, into their Pnimius. It's a moment of Mesiras Nefesh. So Mordechai is thinking to himself, I can't go to these Jews who are the greatest prosecutors. They are guilty for the decree. If they're guilty for the decree, and that's why Esther wants us to fast, and he wants us to fast 3 days and 3 nights, parallel to the days of Achashverosh's party, excluding Shabbos, which is 6 days. 3 days, 3 nights. So you're going to take now the people who are the kategers to become the sanegers? It doesn't make sense. And generally, Mordechai, the Rambam says that the way of living is you go the middle path. Rambam in Hilchos Deis, Derech HaMitzvah, says if somebody goes to one extreme, then you have to go to another extreme. Mordechai is a tzaddik. Mordechai follows the straight path. He doesn't deviate. He wants to deal with Jews who are good Jews, who are righteous Jews, who are Ehrliche Yidden, Frumme Yidden. Esther understood this. So Esther understood that if she tells Mordechai, go gather the Jews, without one word, Leich Knois, Es Kol HaYehudim, Mordechai on his own, logically and rationally, would have excluded certain Jews. These Jews who were engaged in Nenu Misudasai, and those Jews in Shushan who were certainly engaged in prostrating themselves to the idolatry. Here is where Esther comes into the picture. Who is Esther? The Gemara says in Chulin, it's your next source, Chulin Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, Talmud Chulin, page 139b. Esther min HaTorah minayin. What's the source for the name Esther in Torah? It's a strange question. Why do I have to find a source for Esther in Torah? And the Gemara answers, Shenemar, it says, Moshe Rabbeinu, in his final day, speaking to the Jewish people in Parshas Vayelech, he says, Va'anoichi haster aster es panai bayomahu. Hashem says, I will hide and eclipse my face on that day. The word Esther originates in Torah in the words haster aster panai bayomahu. Because the word Esther comes from the word Hester, which means concealment. Not only that, the Gemara says in Tractate Megillah, Rabbi Yehuda says that Esther wasn't her real name. Her real name was Hadassah. Esther was a nickname. And why did they give her the name Esther? Because Ein Esther Magedes es Amavas Beladata. Esther was very discreet and confidential. She was a hidden, modest person. She didn't express where she came from. That's why she got this name Esther. But that became her classic name according to Rabbi. The others say her name was Esther and her nickname was Hadassah. Rabbi Yehuda says no, her name was Hadassah. Esther became the name that becomes attached to her because of this discreet quality, this quality of concealment. What's the idea of Esther min HaTorah minayim v'anoichi aster aster? What are we looking for? A pasuk that uses the word concealment? This pasuk is not just a word that says haster, so we connect it to Esther. It brings out the chiddush, the uniqueness of Esther. Esther understood that sometimes in life, truth is concealed. And truth is so concealed that it's her very name. They say Churchill once said that in a time of war, the truth is so precious you have to protect it by bodyguards of lies. Esther understood that sometimes what you see at the surface is far from reality. Don't judge a book by its cover is not just a cliche, but it's sometimes a path in life. I'm going to hide my face. So if you look at the surface, all you could see is Hester, hiddenness. But as the Baal Shem Tov once said, Hanoichi Aster, even in the Aster is also Hanoichi. The eye is present even in the concealment. This Esther is the one who could perceive. That became her very name. She's the one who tunes into such an error, and she says that Vanoichi Aster is an error where there is concealment, and you have to be able to know that it's concealment. Because the only thing that's worse than concealment is when you think the concealment is revelation. When I think the concealment is absolute, when I don't know how to see beyond it. Esther is the person who teaches that you have to be able to learn that there is concealment, and truth could sometimes be deep down beneath the surface. It has to be excavated, it has to be extricated, it has to be revealed. And therefore Esther had to teach this also to Mordechai. You want to exclude a certain group of Jews because at the surface, they're responsible for the Gzeirah. They're responsible for the calamity. They could never be inspired. Let them be who they are. We're going to focus on a certain group. Esther is the one who says, you have to understand what is beneath the surface. And you have to understand that sometimes truth is very concealed. Hanoichi Aster, that's the Chiddush of Esther. And therefore we have to look deeper. And let's see what Esther is saying. The Gemara says in the next source, Megillah Daf Yud Gimel, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said, Esther yirakroikis hoysa v'chut shal chesed mashach Allah. The Megillah describes how gorgeous Esther was, how appealing Esther was. Says Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, and it's a very strange statement. I want you to know that Esther's face had a greenish color to it. Yirakroikis in Hebrew means greenish. As the Mefarshim say, like a hadas, like a myrtle branch, what we use on Sukkot, or people use for Shabbos sometimes. That's what it looked like. So why was Achashverosh and everybody was so overwhelmed by her? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, Chut shel chesed mashach Allah. There was a thread of grace, of chesed, that was extended over her. There was like a halo of light, of graciousness, of chesed that was on her. And when people saw Esther, she imbued them with that sense of comfort, of ease, of graciousness, of chesed. That's what the Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says. What does he mean? And why do you have to say this about Esther? It says Esther was amazingly appealing. So he says it was a special chut shel chesed. Reb Moshe Cordovero, who was one of the greatest Kabbalists, he's known as the Ramak. He authored a famous work called Talmud Dvorah and many other works. He lived in the 1500s. He passed away 1570. He's buried in Sfas, those graves that are dyed with blue near the Arizal. Ramak was a Rebbe of the Arizal. He passed away Chav Gimel Tammuz Shin Lamed 1570. So he writes in a Sefer of Pardes that Esther was the Shitta of Beis Hillel. We know through two schools of learning, Beis Shamai and Beis Hillel, of course, many generations after Esther. Esther lived before the second Beis HaMikdash. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel lived a century before the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, a few hundred years after Purim. But Beis Shammai was a school that was stringent, and Beis Hillel was the school of Chesed. The school of Hillel is lenient, the school of Shammai is stringent. It says in Zohar that the soul of Shammai and his students came from Gvura, and the soul of Hillel and his students came from Chesed. So Chut shel Chesed, the Ramak says, this is the view of Beis Hillel. To understand the depth of this, let's see one argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel when it comes to a wedding. Now you're going to know half of this argument because it became a Jewish song. But for some reason, the authors of the song cut out from the lyrics most of it. And you'll see why. They were smart for doing it. It wouldn't have become so popular. So you know you know this song, but it's only half the story. This is a Gemara in Ksuvas Tazayin Amid Beis, Tractate Ksuvas, page 16. Tana Rabbanan, Ketzad Merakdin Lifnei HaKala. You have it also in English.
I don't understand why she was green, why they had to say green if really she was testable.
In other words, he was saying that physically, Esther's face was greenish. Nonetheless, her appeal was so powerful because there was a chut shel chesed.
Pretty, but she had things.
I didn't use those words. I didn't say she wasn't pretty. I said yirakreika, she was greenish, which is not usually the color. What? Her complexion was greenish, yeah. The Vilna Gaon actually writes, it says in the Megillah that Hanara was so beautiful, and Vatissa be'enikol, everybody who saw her was enamored. So he says that initially she was, but her agony of being by Achashverosh changed her complexion. And that's what caused this. He says sometimes when people are not feeling well, there's a greenish color. And he says, but still the chut shel chesed was so powerful, it eclipsed everything else. And people were just enamored by her. That's how the Vilna Gaon explains it. What is this chut shel chesed? What does it mean? There's a chut means a thread, so it's a metaphor, obviously. Chut shel chesed, a very interesting expression. The strand, chut is like a thread of chesed that's mashuch. Mashuch is, it's extended. It covers her, it encompasses her. It's like nimshach, it's extended over her. What does this mean? So the Chazal say, Ketzad merakdin lifnei hakala. It's the second chapter of Ksuvos. How do you dance in front of the kala? Bais Shamai oimrim kala kamois shehi. The school of Shamai says, you praise every bride according to who she is. You emphasize her good qualities. Ubeis Hillel oimrim, Beis Hillel says, no. There's something generic. You say it to every bride. Kala nova chasuda. The bride is beautiful and gracious. She's gorgeous and chasuda. She's full of grace, of kindness, of goodness. Amru lehem Beis Shammai leBeis Hillel. This is where it gets a little interesting. Beis Shammai says to Beis Hillel, excusez-moi, why do you have to encourage people to be politically correct and not say the truth? Find what she's good at and talk about that. You don't have to say about somebody who's short that they're tall, somebody who's a little overweight that they're skinny. Don't do that. Midvar sheker tirchak. I know you want to be nice, and I know you want to be pleasant, but it takes away the value of your words. You just say the same compliments to everybody. Nobody takes you serious. You know, you're crying wolf, wolf, but the person says your food is always amazing. Always. Yeah, I know your food is always amazing. It has to have meaning. When I was a yeshiva bacher, there was a joke they used to say. The Chabad boys in the summer would go out on what's called Merker Shlichus, small communities, to build Yiddishkeit over there. So Rabbi Chadukov was the Rebbe's secretary. He'd always give them a prep talk before. And he always said, you're going to eat in the Rav's house or whoever's house. After the meal, you go over to the kitchen and you thank the Rebbetzin for the food. And you explain to her how you enjoyed the food. So one of these boys was a real yeshiva bacher, a little abstract. So at the end of one of the meals, he went over to the Rebbetzin and he said, Rabbi Chadukov, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's secretary, said, I should tell you that the food was very, 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 very good. Vayas Mordechai, he followed instructions. Yeah. Platitudes could be empty. And Beis Shammai gets very dramatic. He says sometimes, and he uses two examples, somebody who's chas v'shalom can't see, somebody who's lame, because he wants to talk about visible things. Something is visible. He says, why are you going to get up and say, here is the epitome of beauty? Choose other things. Helen Keller said, the only thing that's worse than not having eyesight is lacking vision. Don't talk about the eyesight, talk about the vision. And he uses the words, midvar sheker tirchak. Follow me. I said, figure out every person has virtues. Talk about that. It's like the shatchi, you know the joke. There was once, maybe it wasn't a joke. There was a shatchin who offered an older girl to go out with somebody. And she described, the shatchin described to her that he's a gevaldik bacher. Anyway, she comes back from the first meeting, and the Shadchan says to her, or the Shadchana says to her, how was it? Now this was, he was still there, came back to the house and he was there, dropped off, whatever. So she whispers, she says to the Shadchan, you're a dirty liar. He says, why am I a dirty liar? She says, you told me he's smart. The guy is as dumb as it gets. You told me he's handsome. He's mamish the opposite. You told me he's tall, he's short. You told me he's slim, he's fat. You told me he's refined, he's actually grotesque. She's whispering. The Shadchan says, you don't have to whisper, he's deaf too. So, Bais Shamai says, Kala Kamashi, find the milas, don't exaggerate and don't dramatize. Good, this is his question. You see why in the song they took out the view of Bais Shamai, right? Keitzad merakten lifnei hakala, kala nova chasuda. But Bais Shamai doesn't hold that. So now listen to Beis Hillel's answer. Amru lehem Beis Hillel Beis Shamai lidivreichem. Okay, let's follow your way of thinking, okay? You are the honest people. So you always say things the way they are. We don't dramatize, no empty compliments, no vain platitudes. Authenticity, granted. Lidivreichem. Mi shelokach mekach ra min hashuk. Somebody went shopping and they bought a mekach ra. Mekach ra would mean an inferior acquisition. And I should add in parentheses, and they can't return it. There's no return policy. Yishabchenu b'einav or yiganenu b'einav. Somebody's wife comes home, somebody's daughter, son, husband comes home, they bought something, azoinsun azalchas. They spent half of their savings account on it. You can't return it. And you look at it, and one look, and you want to faint. But they ask you, no, what do you say? So should you tell them how ridiculous it is, how they squandered and wasted the money? Remember, they can't return it. Or you should praise it. Of course you should compliment them. They're wearing it. They come to shul. They come to their daughter's chasana, all dressed. You would have never bought it in 1.1 million years. So you tell them how horrible it is, because that's what you think. Of course you say the nice thing. That's his answer to Bais Shammai. What's the answer? That's Bais Shammai's issue. My issue with you is that your compliments mean nothing. You just always say nice things, so you're a nice person. But the Torah says, Midvar Sheketecha. But this is Beis Hillel's answer. And the Gemara finishes, Mikan Amru Chachamim. From here the sages learned a lesson. La'olam te'daita shel adam u'reves ha'mabriyas. A person's disposition should always be integrated with people. What's that? How is that connected? Mikan. The sages didn't know this. From here, from this debate, they learned a lesson. The lesson is, don't live in an ivory tower. Mu'reves. Be mixed up with people. Mixed up means integrated. Famisht. Kol Yisrael, arevim zebazeh. All Jews are guarantors for each other. So the Baal Shem Tov said arevim also means famisht. Like taruvis, la'arev. All Jews are arevim zebazeh. Famisht. And then arevim means also zis. V'harivna. Right? V'sera, v'hariv. V'harivna Hashem alakecha divrei seirascha. Make it sweet. Arev, machal arev is sweet in Hebrew. Arevim, they're sweet. What's the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? It's a very interesting argument. At surface, it would think, yeah, Beis Shammai says, let's just all be PC. Smile, be politically correct. They know you don't mean it. It's fine. It's just how we do things. And Beis Shammai says, I'm sorry. Torah says, Midvar Sheketerchak. Beis Hillel didn't know about a pasuk, Midvar Sheketerchak. The argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is a very fundamental argument. It's not just about this. It's a question about life. And the Gemara says about Esther, Chut shel chesed mashach olah. Beis Shammai says, you have an interesting argument on Mitzvah Shabbos. Mitzvah Shabbos, when you light a candle, what do we say? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, boirei ma'orei ha'esh. Beis Shammai says in Brachos, 8th chapter, you don't say that. You say Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shebara me'or ha'esh. Hashem created the light of fire. We say He creates the lights, the illuminations of fire. Everything we have to argue about. So the Gemara says, Beis Shammai says, there's one flame. Ma'or. Bais Hillel says, no, look at the flame, you'll see many colors. You ever looked at a flame? There's white, there's orange, there's red, there's green, there's yellow, there's black, there's blue. The halacha is like Bais Hillel. I want to ask you a question. You think Beis Shammai didn't know flames have many colors? I look at a flame, my child looks at a flame, your child, they see many colors. Beis Shammai didn't know. There's a fundamental question here. Beis Shammai knows that you could look deeper, but Beis Shammai says halacha relates to reality based on what you see. Bais Hillel says, I know there's what you see, but it's always important to be able to take an X-ray, to be able to take a CAT scan, to be able to go deeper and see what is beneath the surface. Beis Shammai says, you can't lie. You're at a wedding. Speak truth. Bais Hillel is not saying to lie. Bais Hillel is saying, you came to somebody's wedding. Take off your glasses and put on the chassan's glasses. The chassan chose this person as his wife. There's a famous Gemara in Saita, Chein Isha al Baila. In a good marriage, a woman adores her husband and a husband adores his wife. Chein Isha al Baila. Why? Because it's his. She belongs to him and he belongs to her. It's mine. The night of a wedding, Bais Hillel says you came to a wedding. For him, she is the most gorgeous, greatest, most gracious woman in the world. You may have different opinions. Okay. But you're at a chasana. You're at his chasana. Take off your glasses. Put on this person's glasses. You're not lying. You're just understanding that for this chassan, she is the most nava chasuda, no matter what the external features may be from your perception. And that's why he says, Mishalakach mekach. This person went and chose this kala. The kala went and chose this chassan. Because a marriage has to be consensual. Ein mekachines isha elamidaita. We learned from Rivka, right? Rivka had to agree. She chose this chassan. He chose this kala. We're talking about a real choice. For him, she is the greatest gift in the world. I went to the shuk and I lokach. So of course you shabchenu beina, but there's one condition. You have to be integrated with people. If I'm sitting in my own ivory tower and deciding reality, then I'm lying. But if you understand who people are, if you could see things from people's perspectives, it's not a lie when you tune into the inner world of another person and you could describe reality from their perception, even though in your world there may be different perceptions and different ways of determining reality. Beis Shammai knows there's many flames. Beis Shammai says you see a fire, you're enjoying the fire, Beis Hillel says no. Look at the various features. Dig a little deeper. Analyze, dissect. And then you'll see the various colors, the various flames. Get into the pratim. Be nuanced. Be nuanced. Halacha wants you to be nuanced. There's a fascinating story in Gemara in Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, page 31. There were 3 Gentiles who came to Shamai. They wanted to convert. The first one said, I'll convert, but only Torah Shebiksav. I don't accept Torah Shebal Peh. So Beis Shammai threw him out. The second guy said, I'll convert on the condition that you make me a Kohen Gadol. So Beis Shammai threw him out. The third one said, I'll convert, but you have to teach me the whole Torah standing on one leg. In other words, I have 40 seconds for conversion lessons. So Beis Shammai threw him out. They all came to Hillel, and Hillel accepted all of them. And they all became Gevaldik Gerim. And they say the 3 people came together, they were already Jews, and they said if we would have remained, if Shammai would have been the only one we met, we would have been distant from the Shekhinah. Hillel is the one who saved us. So the question is, Shammai seems right. A person comes and says, I want to convert, but I don't accept 90% of halacha. Okay, so you're not serious. I have nothing against you. Teach me the whole Torah on one leg. Thank you. Imagine somebody comes into Harvard Medical School. Teach me everything there is to know about medicine within 2 minutes. What is this, a mockery? Teach me everything there is to know about science and physics and mathematics within 10 minutes. People are dealing with this for 4,000 years. The Gemara says, what are you making a mockery out of Judaism? I want to be the Kohen Gadol. No, who's right? Bais Shammai was right, but Bais Hillel was right. Bais Shammai was right because Bais Shammai listened to their words, and their words were inappropriate. But Bais Hillel says, I know their words are inappropriate, but listen to what's behind their words. They're good people. They just don't understand. They may be ignorant. They may have been misled. They may have misconceptions. And indeed, Hillel started to teach them. And Hillel said, Aleph Beis. He started to teach Aleph Beis. The next day he said, okay, we're going to learn the Aleph Beis. Beis Aleph. The guy said, yesterday it was Aleph Beis. So Hillel said, even for the alphabet you have to rely on me. So for the whole Torah, you're not going to rely on the sages who taught it? He said, okay, it was over. He became a Gedi, except the Torah Shabbat Peh. The other person, he learned Chumash, V'azar HaKarev Yumas. Even Moshe Rabbeinu can't go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. Even a Yisrael, the holiest Jew in the world, can't do what Aaron said. He said, even a Jew can't, even a Yisrael can't be a Kohen Gadol. It's not racism and discrimination that you don't hold from people who are not from the Eigene. He was in. Bais Hillel saw, you have to listen to what's behind people's words. Comes Rabbi Shua ben Korcha and says, Esther, is this Kala? If you would have looked at Esther, what would Shamai say? You can't talk about Kala no. The complexion is very different. But Chut Shel Chesed Mashachala. Everybody saw Esther, they said Kala no v'chasuda. Because there was something pnimiyas in Esther that emerged. Esther says that Amak is the Shitta of Bais Hillel, Chut Shel Chesed. What's Chesed? Chesed is the ability to see that which is hidden beneath the surface. V'anoichi haster aster panei b'yaymahu. So when Esther looks at a Jew, you could look at a Jew and say, spiritually, chigeres, the Jew is lame, spiritually lame. He doesn't know what it means to rotzla mitzvah. Spiritually erect means the Jew, both of his or her legs are healthy spiritually. Their arms are healthy, their legs are healthy, as the Mishnah says, rotzla dvar mitzvah. Or summa, spiritually a person who has no vision. They don't see reality. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, Samim chayshich la'or va'or l'chayshich, mar l'masak ha'masak l'mar. A person who has vision sees the difference between nighttime and daytime, between light and darkness. A person who has developed taste buds knows the difference between bitter food and sweet food. You know people that everything they eat, the bitter is sweet and the sweet is bitter. The Rambam says it's true spiritually as well. That's what it means, summa. So they're talking not just about a kala, a physical wedding. They're talking about Klal Yisrael. Bais Shammai says you look at a Jew and you see chigeres summa. How could you say this Jew is beautiful? How could you say this Jew is gracious? I didn't make up a lie. This Jew's taka has a blemish. The Jew taka has a chisar. The Jew spiritually may be lame or lack vision. So Bais Shammai says, Kala k'mayshei. Find out some nice qualities and talk about it, I don't mind. Comes Bais Hillel and says, Mi shelokach mekach min hashuk. The Rebbeinu Shalom went, Atav v'chartonim Hashem went to the marketplace, and he chose this soul. Hashem chose every Jew as his kala. Ve'irastichli, as the Navi Yeshaya said, Ve'irastichli, I betrothed you to me. Yosis Hashem alayich, we say in the Chadoidi, from the Navi Yeshaya. Yosis alayich elikoyich kimisais chasan al kala. Hashem went and chose this kala. Now you're at the chasana. So what should you tell Hashem? This Jew is beautiful or this Jew is ugly? What do you think is the right thing? You should. Kate said miracle in kala. The chasana is here at the chasana. Should you tell the Rebbeinu Shalom chasan? Bad choice. You should have called me before the wedding. You should have called me. That's what you should tell Hashem. You shabchenu beinav v'yiganenu beinav. You say, I'm looking, I don't see. So Shmuel Hanavi told, so Hashem told Shmuel Hanavi, Al tabeit el mareyu. Shmuel looked at all the sons of David, of Yishai. Don't look at the external feature. Ha'adam yireh le'nayim v'Hashem yireh la'levav. But there's one condition. La'olam te'daita shaladam mu'reves im habriyas. You have to be integrated with people. Malachim, throughout Chazal and Tanakh, They always find avlas by Jews. They always have what to say. Don't give them the Torah, they did this wrong, they did that wrong. So it says in Sfarim, that's all till the Malachim come down to this world. They're sitting in heaven, they look and they say, these are beautiful people, these are gracious people, these are sinners. Suddenly you send a Malach down to this world and you see even a small mitzvah they can't keep. Hashem tells the Malachim, even Basa B'chalav you couldn't keep by Avram Avinu. HaNefilim Hayu Ba'aretz, they come down to earth with the Nisyonis, it's a whole different story. Only a Neshama prevails in this world. Murevesim Abriyas, if you understand people, if you could see things from people's perspective, from other people's perspectives, if you understand the journey of a Neshama in a guf, if you understand the Nisyonis of Olam Hazeh, if you understand the trials and tribulations that people go through emotionally, psychologically, physically, financially, spiritually, internally or externally, if you appreciate the fluctuations and the vicissitudes of a person's soul and their journey in Olam Hazeh, in often a challenging life with the stress and the anxiety and the obstacles, etc., etc., Bais Hillel says you're not lying. You're just looking beneath the surface. You'll see it's not just colorful, it's full of colors. You have to be able to look beneath the concealment. So Esther knows about the Jews that Nenu Misidasa Shaloisi Rasha. But she's the one who tells Mordechai, Lech Knois Eskol HaYehudim. And here it goes one step further. And the Gemara continues that Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi would dance with a hadas in front of every kala, and he would say kala na v'chasuda. And the hadas is, of course, that color of Esther. Chut shel chesed mashu chala. So he would dance with a hadas and say kala na v'chasuda, because the halach is not like Beis Shammai. The halach is like Beis Hillel. The Arizal says when Mashiach comes, the law is going to be like Beis Shammai in everything. Why? Because when Mashiach comes, then you could take a paskin like Beis Shammai, no problem. When Mashiach comes, there'll be a seamless flow. The inner and the outer will be one. Of course you should paskin like Beis Shammai. But in a time of galus, the halach is like Beis Hillel, not like Beis Shammai. There is dissonance. There is a dichotomy. My soul is sometimes trapped and concealed. My brother once shared with me a line. Somebody asked Michelangelo how he managed to sculpture David. His sculptures are brilliant, how he managed to do it. So Michelangelo said, I saw the angel trapped in the marble, and I chiseled away on the marble, and I set the angel free. Esther understood that the angel is trapped in a marble. That's what Esther means. There is concealment. And when there is concealment, I could do one of two things. I could become part of the problem, or I could become part of the solution. Part of the problem means I surrender to the concealment. I create even a deeper concealment. I cause the darkness to grow. Or I can actually shine a light and reveal the various lights, the various illuminations that are beneath the surface. I could put on a deeper pair of lenses and say earnestly, Kala na v'chasuda, chut shel chesed. There's that grace that you could see, mashu chala. On that person you say, yellow, green, I don't like this spiritual complexion. It's not my taste. But Esther fulfills something much more. Remember, where did Mordechai live and where did Esther live? These Jews came to a party of the king for 7 days. He invited them. What happened? They stumbled. They failed. They ate non-kosher food. They celebrated in a party of a Russia. Who understood their test? If not Esther, who was living for years in a non-Jewish environment and understood the nisayon of eating kosher food in such an environment. Mordechai never had such a test. Mordechai was a tzaddik. Mordechai lived Tzivia Yidden. Mordechai had a yeshiva. Mordechai was a Rosh HaSanhedrin. Fakert, when Mordechai came to the palace, they gave him kashrus, mahadim and a mahadrin, badatz, eidachredis, Rabbi Lando, alle gute Sachen. But Esther couldn't say she was a Jew. If Esther would have not could say I'm a Jew, so Achashverosh would have arranged a catering every day. The caterer would bring in breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She'd probably get sick of it after a few days. But fine, he would make for her a kosher kitchen and hire kosher chefs. Achashverosh had money. But Esther couldn't say she was a Jew, so she couldn't ask for kosher food. So what happened? She ate kosher for years without anybody knowing that she's dafka eating kosher. How deep was that test? And how difficult was it for her? And how much could she empathize with a Jew who in such an environment does surrender? And furthermore, we see in the Megillah something quite surprising and startling. And I'm going to ask you to look at the next source. After Ksuvas, Megillah Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. That's the same page where we spoke about Esther's complexion. The pasuk says, "Vayishaneh v'esnariseh l'toif." Esther was brought to the king, and there was a fellow Haggai. He was in charge on all the women that were brought, and he saw Esther, and he deviated. He gravitated. He made changes for her and her maidservants l'toif in the positive. What did he do? Amar Rav. Rav said, "Ha'chila Michael Yehudi." He gave her kosher food, even though they didn't know she's Jewish. The Mefarshim say they knew that she was raised by Mordechai. They thought Mordechai raised a non-Jewish girl who was an orphan, but she said, I grew up in a Jewish house, I'm used to kosher food, so he gave her kosher food. The Ben Yehoyada says she claimed that kosher food is healthier, so they gave her kosher food. He was the rabbi of Baghdad, and he says that he heard that the Queen of England eats kosher shchita because treif comes from illness, so she doesn't want it. That's what he writes. He passed away in 1900. I never did the research. He says Esther could have said, "I want to." The Jews know how to eat. They have good. Remember, there was Natilas Yadayim by Jews. They're good with hygiene. They're good with their kosher food is healthy food. She got away with it. Shmuel says Shechila kadle da chaziri. When it says he treated her well, in his mind, a goyish mind, how do you treat a girl well? He gave her the fat of the pork, of the chazer. Kadli the chaziri is the shuman, the fattiest, choicest parts of pig. He gave it to her. That's what happened. So Esther in the palace was given kadli the chaziri, and then Rabbi Yochanan Amazaroinim, he gave her legumes and sprouts, what we like. Millet and peas and sprouts, all the good things. Now look at Shmuel's opinion. Hechila kadli de chaziri. I want to ask you a question. Did she eat this pig fat or not? Take a look in Rashi. Rashi says, kadli chaziri is bakunish shmeinim. It's the fat part of the chazer, of the swine, of the pork. Umetoich einsa loinensha. And because she was an oinus, she was starving. She had nothing to eat. And to refuse it, she might die. Or the king would kill her, or they would kill her, because she's supposed to be a potential queen. This is before she became a queen. So she ate it. And loy nensha, there's no penalty for it. She was an oinus. It's like a person who's starving. Pikuach nefesh doiche kol ha'torah kula. That's Rashi. Toisvis, kadli de chaziri, chas v'shalom hi loy hoysai chelas. He served it to her. Hey, guys, served it, but chas v'shalom, she never ate it. It's an argument between Rashi and Toisvis, how you learn the Gemara. The fact that she was offered chazer, that's not a question according to Shmuel. What she did, Rashi says she ate it, Shmuel says she didn't. Now I want to ask you a question. Why did the Rebbeinu Shel Olam have it that Esther would eat, according to Rashi, kadli the chaziri? She could have asked him for another food. Apparently it didn't work. This is what he wanted she should eat. And she would have starved or been executed. But the Hashgacha had Esther eat this food. Even according to Tosfos, she didn't eat it, but she was tested. According to Rashi, she ate it. What happens? But now we can understand. Leich knoises kol haYehudim. Esther is mu'reves abrius. When Esther thinks about the Jews who nenu misudasir shaloisei rotsha, she doesn't understand them. She feels them. She empathizes with them. Even according to Tosfos, she never ate it, but she understood what it means. And according to everybody, once she became a queen, it says in Targum Sheni, she didn't even eat bishulakum. Forget about eating treif. She didn't even eat. She was completely kosher without telling anybody she's Jewish. So for years, she understood the nisayon of being in an environment where there's no kosher and what it means to fight. She understood those who failed, those who unfortunately stumbled, those who unfortunately who surrendered. She understands the Nisayan. It's something Mordechai can't relate to because of his amazing life experience. And in fact, if you ever learn Sefer Daniel, you know Nebuchadnezzar took from Jerusalem young children and they became his top advisors. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Nebuchadnezzar put them all on a very, very rich protein diet of meat. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah asked the maltzer, asked the cook, the chef, please give us zaironim, give us sprouts, give us legumes, give us these types of... He said, I can't. Nebuchadnezzar wants you to grow well and healthy. He's going to kill me. They said, do it for 10 days and we'll see. He fed them for 10 days these seeds, and they looked better than the other ones, than the other servants. So that's what they continued to eat. This is in Tanakh and Daniel. They said they're Jewish. They were taken from Yerushalayim. So finally the king understood. You give them kosher food. Esther couldn't say she's Jewish. So it was one long battle of being the queen, being at every party. You know how queens are, especially in the Persian monarch. You have to be the hostess. You see what the king wanted from Vashti, but she can't eat non-kosher. She understood the Nisayan. And now here is the deal. You cannot help somebody, really, if you don't experience what they're going through. In fact, when Mordechai first sends a message to Esther about the Gzeirish, he says, Megillah says that he gave over to Mordechai, to Esther, Eis Asher Karahu. What happened to him? It didn't happen to him, it happened to everybody. The answer is, if it didn't happen to everybody, it happened to him. Because only when I feel it on my own flesh, only when I feel it in my own guts, in my own blood, can I really, really experience somebody else, can I help them. There's a very profound story that occurred with the son of the Balatanya. He's known as the Mittler Rebbe, Reb Doiv Ber. In Chabad, he was the second Rebbe, the son of the Balatanya. Rabbeinu Doiv Ber, they call him the Mittler Rebbe. He passed away, Tovkuf Peches, 1827, on Tes Kislev. He was once seeing people on Yechidus. Jews were coming for counsel, for blessings. And he was counseling them, he was giving them advice. They call it Yechidus, a personal, private audience between a chassid and a Rebbe. After a few days, somebody came in, and he spent some time there. And when he left, the Mittler Rebbe locked the door, and he said he can't see anybody. And for the next 3 days, he was in a tainus. He didn't eat. He davened, but he couldn't see people, and he wouldn't see people. And behind the door, they heard him say Tehillim, and they heard him crying a lot. And after 3 days, he opened the door. He broke his fast. And what happened then was he asked that they bring the person back. And he continued on. When I say he fasted, he ate something at night, I believe, but during the days he had a tainus. So his son asked him, Rebbe, what happened? And he said something unbelievable. He said, a Jew came and he shared with me something he did. Whenever anybody shares something they did that was destructive, that was inappropriate, I don't give them advice. I first find that action within myself, even if in a more refined way, I find it within me, and only then can I help them. This person came, and his crime, his sin was so heinous, it was so beyond comprehension, that I realized I cannot find it in myself. And then I thought, but Hashem sent him to me. That means I could help him. But I can't help him. So for 3 days I had to become truly introspective until I discovered this quality that was hidden inside of me, and then I can help him. So what is he really communicating here? The depth of what he's communicating here is that if I do not feel what you're going through, I can't help you. And it's not something that we intuitively understand, because we think, I'm smart, I have experience, I may be a therapist for 69 years, I know all the textbooks, of course I can help. It's not true. It doesn't work that way. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's considered one of the top world experts on trauma. He's not Jewish. He wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. He's been a doctor for many years, but he's considered like one of the top experts. He lives on trauma. He lives in Massachusetts, and I asked him. It's on the web. I asked him if from all of his years of experience, he's in the mental health field 50 years or more. When a person is choosing a therapist or a professional to speak to, what field, what type? There's so many, and everyone, I was asking like you ask a shadchan, where do you begin, and how do you know if the person is good, and how do you know if it's successful? People are often so vulnerable in such a state, they need desperately help. And what form of healing? There's so many different forms of therapy and different models of healing. What model would he suggest from all of his abundant experience? And he said something fascinating. He said, it almost makes no difference. I said, what makes no difference? He said, it almost makes no difference the level of education, how much they know, and what form therapeutic model they're using. I said, that's coming from you? He says, I'll tell you what makes most difference. He said, of course you need to be educated. And of course you need to know what's going on. And of course you need to understand the variables. He said, that's not the most important thing. I said, what's the most important thing? And he said these words, the most important thing is that a therapist should be a worked out person internally so that they don't bring in their own issues into the healing, so that when they're sitting with somebody, they could completely open their heart and become a containing presence for the other person's journey. And the only way you could become a containing presence for the other person's journey is if you know what's going on inside of yourself. He used a word that I'm not going to repeat. He says, if you don't have your spaghetti worked out, you will never be able to really heal people. If you're coming from a place of, I know your problem, I'm coming from a place of authority. I said, but that's what all psychiatrists do. He says, yeah, many psychiatrists are psychiatrists, but they're not people. I'm like, what are you telling me? He's saying, very often people are just textbooks. You fit into my textbook, here's medication, next. He said, the key, he says, sometimes you need medicine. Sometimes it saves lives. But the key is that I could really, really tune in to your life, feel it, experience it, and I become like a womb. The Maharal says that rechem, the word for womb, rechem, comes from the word rachamim, compassion. What's a womb? I feel uncomfortable preaching about this here, but what is it? It's spiritually I'm talking about. It's containing the child. That's what it is. That's its whole tafkid. I'm not here to judge the child. I'm not here to decide what type of soul the child has or what type of body. I'm here, that's what rechem is. I'm here to contain. But how do you contain somebody else? I have my issues. Can I contain you? I come with my mind. I come with my issues. I come with my distraction, especially if it's your child. There's so many expectations. That's where it becomes really difficult. But in the world of chinuch, whether it's in a school or in a house, this is the yahrzeit ha-yahrzeitis of an educator or of a parent. Because what happens when you have an educator who may be brilliant and may be a very good person and idealistic and really good and they mean well? There's only one issue. They don't experience what the student is going through. They never had to. They don't know what it is. They know it maybe from a book. But experientially, I can't be on you with your journey. And if I can't be with you on your journey, automatically I come from a more judgmental place. I come from a place of distance, from superiority, authority. Not that I mean bad. I may be a very nice and good meaning and ehrliche person. But when that child or that boy or that girl feels that womb, they feel your presence, they feel that emotional energy that you actually get me. And now I can actually be here with you without judging and with full love. Chut shel chesed mashachala. And like Esther, I don't allow the concealments to distract me. I don't look at you and say, but, after this session you got to be normal. Snap out of it, girl. Snap out of it, boy. Come on, give nachas to your parents. Those are normal human emotions. I'm not judging any of those emotions. We all have them. But that's not where healing comes from. All healing comes from, and this the Rebbe understands that he has to find this. And I have to tell you, the sin that this person did was not that he forgot Mayim Achronim. What it was, I'll tell you the word in English, I'm not going to elaborate, it was necrophilia. That's what he came to the Mittler Rebbe for. But he wanted to do tshuva. The lodger Rav, HaRav Chaim Michel, understood if this person doesn't know what it is to be outside on a winter night, he understands tzedakah. Who doesn't understand to be nice? But I have to feel viscerally the cold. I have to feel the pain that this child is going through. And if not, I have to be humble and say, I don't feel, I don't understand. Das ist auch a madrega. That's also a madrega. So Dr. Bessel van der Kolk told me, he said, Rabbi Wari, I'm telling you, the level of education is nice and important. That's not the key. The key is how worked out you are in yourself. Do you know how to suspend your ego? Do you know how to suspend your expectations? Can you notice your own anger? Can I notice my triggers? Can I notice what's happening inside? In other words, my main work is not here. My main work is here. Here. Can I notice it and see if it's controlling the conversation? The Baal Shem Tov put it brilliantly in a Mishnah that says in a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, Shliach tzibur she'enoi mechuyev bedavar enoi moitzi es harabim yedei chayvasan. A shliach tzibur who's not obligated in the mitzvah can't fulfill the obligation of somebody else. If I'm not obligated to blow shofar or read the Megillah, I can't do it for people who are obligated. So he said the word is shliach tzibur she'enoi mechuyev. The word mechuyev we translate as obligated. It really means guilty. A shliach tzibur she'enoi mechuyev bedavar. If he's not guilty, he can't take out the rabbim from their guilt. If I am not part of your experience in any form or fashion, if I cannot find your flaw inside of me, if I cannot find your pain inside of me, if I cannot find your mistakes inside of me, if I cannot find your struggle inside of me, maybe in a different way, it doesn't mean that I'm a copy of you. But it means that I can relate to this. I can feel what's happening inside of you. Now, I can really be there in your world and help you see your light. Because I help you see your light from your darkness. Esther had this ability. Because Esther knew what these Jews went through. She found it in herself. She ate kadli de chaziri, according to Rashi. Or she had to fight against it, according to Tosfos. So when Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that the Jewish people created a golden calf, the words that he uses, the two words is lech reid, go down. So Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin writes, and also the Kamarner Rebbe writes in Kesem Ofer, he says, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, you're on the mountain, lech reid, you're going to have to go down into their space in order to be able to lift them up. In fact, Reb Tzadok says, and the Kamarner says, that's why Moshe broke the luchas. Nobody knows. Why did he break the luchas? If the Jews were undeserving of them, hide them. Give them back to Hashem. Put them away. You know, the luchas were not, it's like, you're angry, I understand. So when you're angry, you take something that's worth $100 million and you break it, and this was not worth $100 million. This was priceless. There's no substitute. Let's say you buy your husband a gift. You come home, he's giving you an attitude. You're in a bad mood. So you destroy it. You put it away. Hopefully there'll be a better day. Sell it on eBay, whatever. What's the brachse de luchas? So Reb Tzadok says something astounding. He says, the Gemara says in Maseches Shabbos, Kuf Dalet, somebody who breaks utensils out of anger, harehu ka'oved avodah zara. It's a form of idolatry. So he says shocking words. Hashem told Moshe, lech reid. If you want to lift up the Jewish people, you're going to have to go down. But Moshe had no connection to their sin. He was on the mountain. So he broke the most expensive utensil out of anger. Harehu kevayachol, in a very, very subtle way. He now had a connection to them. And from that place, he can uplift them. And you'll say, but why? Why can't I just sit on the chair and look at you and give you advice? And I can't explain it, but it's anybody who's involved in this knows the experience of it. That's how all healing happens. All healing happens from that energy where the person can experience you believing in them from amidst that place because you know what that place looks like. So Esther comes to Mordechai and says, Taya to Mordechai, I know what you might be thinking. Leich Knois es kol ha-Yehudim. Go gather kol ha-Yehudim. Why kol? Leich Knois es ha-Yehudim. Because Mordechai will naturally exclude a certain category of Jews. So Esther says, Hakoil asuyamai, those Jews that nenu misudasa shaloisa Russia, and those Jews that ishtachvu l'tzelem, yes, invite them to fast for 3 days and 3 nights, bring them into the gathering, and you know what will happen? Mineu ve'avu l'shadi be'narga, the Gemara says, the tree is felled from the wood of the axe that's taken from the tree. And that's why the prophecy about the defeat of Esav came from Ovadia. Va'olu Moshe and Bahartzi, and Ovadia was a descendant of Esav, because you take the wood from the tree to create the axe to cut the tree. These Jews that nenu misudasai, they'll create the transformation. This tree, their fasting will be the true transformation. That will make this hapcha. So leich knois es kol ha-Yehudim. In Kabbalah also it says Mordechai comes from the world of Atzilus, a world where there's no evil, lo yagur chara. Esther comes from the world of Malchus, known as the worlds of Bri, Yitzira, Asiya. When Mordechai wants to gather Jews, he gathers Jews from Atzilus. He gathers Jews from the holiness. Esther says, es kol ha-Yehudim, every Jew. One more detail, look at her words. She could have said, leich knois es ha-Yehudim kulam. Gather the Jews, all of them. She starts off with kol, leich knois es kol ha-Yehudim. Who do you start with? She starts with these Jews of kol. Because the Gemara says in Krisis a tainus that does kol tainus she'ein ba mipoisha Yisrael, a fast day that doesn't include the sinners kavayachal of Israel is not a tainus. That's why in the Ketores, the 11 herbs, we included chelbana, which doesn't have a pleasant fowl. So if you want the knoises kol ha-Yehudim, she starts off with knoises kol. Start off with them. And from them all Jews would be saved. This is what Esther says. Now comes the second chiddush. Vayas kechoil asher tzivsa of Esther. Mordechai didn't just do what Esther said. Kechoil asher tzivsa of Esther. He understood the koil of Esther. He took her word serious. Leich knoises kol ha-Yehudim. He went and he gathered every single Jew. And every one of them successfully joined, like Esther foresaw, because she knew the pnimiyas of the Jews. She knew Anoichi Hasta Aster. She knew Kalanova Chasuda. She knew what they went through. He went and did it, and indeed, La Yehudim Oisar, the transformation happened. It's not just Haman was defeated. Bais Haman Asati La Esther. The house of Haman was given to Esther. There was a transformation, because there was a transformation by the Jews. He didn't just go to the Jews who initially are in a space of light. He created a transformation of Kol HaYehudim. And that created this hapcha, that the transformation that Bais Haman Asati La Esther. So the Torah, the Megillah uses the words, Vayavor Mordechai. Mordechai passed over. Rav says he transgressed the mitzvah of Pesach. So the Kamarna writes, Moshe broke the luchas to go down. Mordechai also had to do Vayavor. He also had to descend. But then comes the view of Shmuel. Shmuel says, Avar Arkasa Demaya. The second view. He passed a stream of water. And who is this Shmuel? Yeah, the same Shmuel who said that Esther was fed kadli de chaziri. When she came, she was given pork. Not because she chose it. It wasn't nenu chas v'shalom. But it was her experience. And Rashi says she had to eat it. Tosfos says chas v'shalom, she didn't eat it. But she dealt with it, she struggled with it. The same Shmuel says, Vayaver Mordechai. He crossed a pond of water. And the question is, okay, he crossed a pond of water, very nice. But the Megillah has to tell me, Vayavar Mordechai. But of course, as the Maharal brings, when Avram was going to the Akedah, we know what happened. The Satan created a whole sea, a whole river. What does that represent? Stop. Don't go further. You're going to drown. Generally, an ocean, a water stream, a canal, a mikveh, something a person can't live in. Water is a dangerous place. We're not fish. We're not amphibious creatures. Passing into water, there's a concept of hagoimel, right? Somebody who goes through a yam. Because a yam represents you going into a new world that's not inhabited, it's not a place that humans can inhabit. So the Gemara is explaining here a deep remez. Mordechai had to pass through a gulf. Mordechai had to pass through a river, a sea, a stream, a canal, a shlulis mayim. A place like when Avram is going to the Akedah, you feel like, I can't, this is not for me, go back. The intimate sentiments, the inner sentiments of Mordechai are saying, why should I go over this? This is too hard, this is too difficult. I'm going out of a comfort zone, I'm going to a group of Jews that don't belong to this. I'm not going to convince them to fast for 3 days and 3 nights. This is the obstacle that the water here represents, especially that you have to pass over the water, ein mayim el Torah, Jews who are so disconnected from the mayim of Torah. But Mordechai listens to Esther. Vayas kechol asher tzivsa. Vayavar. He went out. He went over the water. He went over this obstacle to do kechol, the leich knoises kol haYehudim. In every person's life, a person says, Akati avdei Achashverosh, it's still a time of galus. I'll worry about myself. I have enough inner work and inner perfection to do. Comes Esther and says, no, leich knois es kol haYehudim. Never ever give up on a person. Go gather every single Jew. And even in a time and a person that represents concealment, have the ability to be able to really see through it. Don't become part of the problem, always be part of the solution. Don't become engulfed by the darkness, see the light. And become that person who helps them see the light. Because only when I could see it can I help the other person really, really, really see it. But it takes so much work because it's so easy to be trapped. Literally, to be lured into the external trap. The ability to say, Kala Nova Chasuda, is so much inner work. It's being anchored in that space of infinity that sees the light in every mitzias and every reality. The leich knoises es kol haYehudim. And when I gather that kol, beginning with those people who are closest to me, but leich knoises kol haYehudim, without distinction. So then what happens? It's not just they're also saved. Mordechai is saved. Esther is saved. It's those Jews that ultimately allow the transformation and the salvation of all of the Jewish people. Have a wonderful week.